When a desperate fan stormed the stage during Michael Jackson's most iconic performance of Smooth Criminal, 72,000 people watched in stunned silence as security rushed forward. But what Michael did next defied every protocol and changed how concerts handle interruptions forever. Instead of letting security drag the intruder away, the global superstar made a split-second decision that revealed the man behind the myth in ways no choreographed move ever could. But what did Michael whisper to that fan during those tense seconds that not only calmed the situation, but created a moment so powerful it's still influencing how artists connect with their audiences today? The summer heat of London hung heavy in the air as massive crowds merged into a single deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of Wembley Stadium. It was July 16th, 1988, and the Bad World Tour had reached its crescendo in one of the world's most prestigious venues. The brilliant illumination dimmed to near blackness, and in that suspended moment of anticipation, you could feel the collective breath of an entire stadium being held. The air itself seemed charged with electricity, thick with the expectation of witnessing something extraordinary. Then came the opening chords of Smooth Criminal, that unmistakable bass line that had become the heartbeat of a generation. The crowd exploded as a single spotlight pierced the darkness, revealing a figure in pristine white. The lean silhouette, the flawlessly tilted fedora, the gloved hand already moving to the rhythm that had captured the world's imagination. Michael Jackson stepped into the light, and time seemed to bend around him like light around a star. Every step was poetry in motion, every gesture calculated, yet effortless. The white suit caught the blazing spotlights like liquid mercury, transforming him into something otherworldly. His feet moved across the stage with that signature glide that defied gravity, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next, as if choreographed by the gods themselves. When he struck the pose for his famous anti-gravity lean, the stadium erupted in a sound that transcended mere applause. It was pure human emotion given voice, a primal scream of joy and disbelief. But tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air that went beyond the usual magic of a Michael Jackson performance, something that crackled beneath the surface of the orchestrated spectacle. In the VIP section, the protection team exchanged glances, their trained eyes scanning the crowd with unusual intensity. Years of experience had taught them to read the subtle signs of trouble brewing, and tonight those signs were everywhere. Something was building in the front rows, a restless energy that rippled through the sea of faces like wind across water. Groups of fans were pressing forward with unusual determination, their movements more urgent than the typical concert surge. Voices were rising above the music in ways that suggested desperation rather than mere enthusiasm. The metal barriers groaned under increased pressure as bodies pushed against them with relentless force. Michael sensed it too, his performer's instinct, honed through decades of reading audiences like weather patterns, picked up on the subtle shift in the crowd's energy. A group of fans in the front section was pushing forward with unusual determination, their eyes locked on the stage with an intensity that went beyond normal concert excitement. Their faces were flushed, not just with heat, but with something more primal, a need that bordered on desperation. Venue personnel moved closer to the barriers, their radios crackling with quiet communications that cut through the music like whispered warnings. The guards' body language shifted from casual observation to alert readiness, their hands moving instinctively to their equipment as they prepared for whatever was building in the crowd. As Michael spun into the song's iconic choreography, his peripheral vision caught movement. Someone was testing the security barriers, hands gripping the metal with white knuckles. The crowd around them was growing more agitated, voices rising above the music in a cacophony of frustrated desire. But Michael continued, his professionalism never wavering, even as every instinct told him that events were converging toward shattering the carefully constructed magic of the evening. The stage seemed to pulse with anticipation, the lights casting long shadows that danced with Michael's movements like dark omens. 72,000 people were completely entranced, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would redefine everything they thought they knew about live performance. The music swelled, Michael's voice soared through the stadium, and in the front section, the moment approached when someone would make a decision that would change concert history forever. Behind the flawless facade of the King of Pop, Michael Jackson was fighting battles that his audience could never see. The Bad World Tour had been relentless 18 months of sold-out stadiums, screaming fans, and the crushing weight of being the most famous person on the planet. Every night, he transformed into the Michael Jackson the world expected. But the cost of that transformation was becoming harder to bear. His body ached from the demanding choreography, performed night after night with immaculate timing. The anti-gravity lean alone required core strength that pushed his frame to its limits, and the elaborate costumes, while visually stunning, trapped heat against his skin under the blazing stage lights. But physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional toll of living up to an impossible standard of perfection. In his dressing room, before each show, Michael would sit in front of the mirror, watching himself disappear into the persona the world demanded. The shy, soft-spoken man from Gary, Indiana, would fade away, replaced by the confident, otherworldly performer who could command the attention of millions. It was a transformation that required him to reach into the deepest parts of his soul and pull out something magical, something that belonged as much to his audience as it did to him. Tonight at Wembley, that transformation felt more fragile than usual. The pressure of performing in London, in front of royalty and critics who scrutinized every move, added layers of intensity to an already overwhelming experience. Every song had to be flawless. Every dance move had to transcend the last time he'd performed it. The audience expected nothing less than magic, and Michael had built his career on never disappointing them. But there was something else weighing on him, a growing awareness of how isolated he'd become from the very people who loved him most. The barriers between him and his fans had grown higher and more impenetrable with each passing year. Security protocols, legal concerns, and the simple logistics of his fame had created a chasm between the man who wanted to connect and the millions who desperately wanted to be close to him. As he moved through the familiar choreography of Smooth Criminal, Michael's eyes swept across the sea of faces before him. Each person had paid to be there, had invested their time and money and hope in the belief that he could give them something transcendent. The responsibility of that trust pressed down on him like a physical weight. They weren't just watching Michael Jackson perform. They were experiencing a shared moment of joy, escape, and human connection that he had the power to create or destroy. The music pounded through his body. His voice soared over the crowd. But part of his mind remained hyper-aware of the growing disturbance in the front section. He could see security tightening their formation, could feel the shift in energy that preceded something unprecedented. In that moment, suspended between the perfection of his performance and the unpredictability of human nature, destiny was unfolding as Michael Jackson faced a choice that would reveal who he truly was beneath the sequined glove and tilted fedora. The moment arrived with the sudden violence of a thunderclap. In the middle of the song's most intricate sequence, as Michael executed a flawless spin that had taken months to perfect, a figure broke free from the front section with explosive determination. The fan, a young man in his 20s with wild eyes and Michael Jackson t-shirt, vaulted over the security barrier with surprising agility and began scrambling up onto the stage. Time fractured into slow motion. The music continued for a split second before the band, seeing what was happening, began to falter. The bass line stuttered, the drums missed a beat, and then silence crashed over Wembley Stadium like a physical force. The sea of humanity collectively gasped, creating a sound unlike anything any of them had ever heard. The sharp intake of breath from an entire city's worth of people experiencing shock simultaneously. Michael froze mid-choreography, his arms still extended from the move he'd been executing, his body precisely balanced on one foot. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, he remained suspended in that position while his mind processed what was happening. Uniformed officers were already in motion, their black-clad forms converging on the stage like shadows given substance, radios crackling urgent commands that cut through the deathly quiet. The desperate fan reached the stage and stood there, perhaps 10 feet from Michael, breathing heavily from his climb, and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His face was flushed, his hands shaking, but his eyes were locked on Michael with an intensity that spoke of desperation rather than malice. This wasn't aggression, this was pure, overwhelming need for connection that had driven him beyond reason and social barriers. Michael's first instinct was to step back, to let security handle the situation as they'd been trained to do, but something in the young man's face stopped him. There was no threat there, no anger or violence. Instead, Michael saw something he recognized from his own mirror, the face of someone who had been pushed to their breaking point by forces beyond their control. The protection team was seconds away from tackling the intruder to the ground when Michael did something that would be replayed in concert halls and discussed in security training sessions for decades to come. He raised his right hand, the one with the legendary sequined glove, and made a simple gesture that commanded instant attention. His palm faced outward toward the advancing security guards. In a clear signal, stop. The stadium held its breath. Even the uniformed officers hesitated, their training warring with the unmistakable authority in Michael's gesture. The silence stretched taut as a wire, filled with the potential energy of the entire stadium, waiting to see what would happen next. In that moment, every eye in Wembley was focused on the space between two human beings, one the most famous entertainer in the world, the other a desperate fan who had crossed every line to be close to his idol. The theatrical lighting continued to bathe them both in brilliant white light, but the manufactured magic of the performance had evaporated, leaving something far more raw and dangerous in its place. This was no longer a concert. It was a human moment, suspended in time and space, with the entire world watching to see what Michael Jackson would choose to do when stripped of his choreography and faced with pure, unfiltered human need. What happened next would become the stuff of legend, but in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Michael Jackson, the legendary performer, the man who had spent his entire adult life perfecting the art of controlled performance, slowly began to walk toward the intruder. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world to close the distance between himself and this desperate fan. As he moved, Michael reached up with both hands and removed his iconic fedora. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it transformed him instantly from larger-than-life performer into something more human, more accessible. His hair caught the stage lights, and for the first time in the evening, everyone in the audience could see his face clearly, unshaded by the brim of his hat. The young man stood frozen as Michael approached, his breathing visible in the evening air, his eyes wide with disbelief at what was happening. When Michael stopped directly in front of him, close enough to touch, the silence in the stadium became so complete that people in the back rows could hear the hum of the sound equipment. Michael looked into the intruder's eyes and spoke, his voice too quiet for the audience to hear but loud enough for the man before him. The words were simple, unrehearsed, coming from some deep well of empathy that fame hadn't been able to touch. "What's your name?" he asked. And then, when the fan answered in a trembling whisper, "Are you okay? What do you need?" The conversation lasted no more than 90 seconds, but those watching from the audience would later swear they could see something profound happening between the two men. Michael's posture remained open, non-threatening, his famous hands gesturing gently as he spoke. The fan's breathing gradually slowed, his shoulders relaxing as whatever desperate energy had driven him onto the stage began to dissipate. Then Michael did something that security protocols would never have allowed. He placed his hand on the young man's shoulder and began to walk with him toward the side of the stage, not dragging, not pushing, but walking together like two people who had found understanding. The fan moved willingly, his crisis seemingly resolved by nothing more than being seen, being heard, being treated with dignity in his moment of breakdown. As they reached the edge of the stage where security waited, Michael leaned in close and said something that made the fan nod vigorously before being led away, not roughly, but with the same gentleness Michael had modeled. The king of pop watched until the young man had been safely escorted to where he could receive proper help, then turned back to face his audience. He walked to the center of the stage, replaced his fedora with characteristic flair, and raised the microphone to his lips. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stadium's sound system, "we all need someone to listen. Music is about connection, and tonight, we're all connected." The crowd erupted in applause that seemed to last forever, but it was different from the screaming adulation that had greeted his entrance. This was applause born of respect, of witnessing something genuine and profound. When Michael finally signaled the band to resume Smooth Criminal, every soul in attendance knew they had witnessed something that transcended entertainment. They had seen an artist become fully human, and in doing so, had shown them something about their own capacity for grace. The incident would change concert security forever, with Michael's response becoming the gold standard for handling disruptions with compassion rather than force. But more than that, it would be remembered as the night music's biggest icon, proved that behind all the sequins and moonwalks was a man who understood that sometimes the greatest performance is simply being present for another human being in their moment of need.